Hello and welcome to Saturday Soundbites. This is Veronica Sofer. I am your host. I'm so glad to have you here today. Here on Saturday Soundbites, we talk all things visibility strategy. So that could be marketing, advertising, public relations, branding, networking. We've got a lot of public speakers in our group. So this episode is going to be one for you. We also have a lot of authors in the book, and we have a lot of entrepreneurs who are really looking to grow their business and leverage different ways of visibility strategy. And for some of you, that means speaking at conferences and large events and in front of large groups. So I have got a guest for you that's really going to bring some insight into that. If you're watching on Facebook, let us know you're watching. Drop us a comment. And if you're watching on the replay, hashtag replay. If you're listening on the podcast, hit subscribe. We want to make sure that you don't miss any episodes of Saturday Soundbites. So with that, I will bring on our amazing guest today, Mr. Joel Schwartzberg. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Veronica. It's a pleasure to be here with your Saturday Soundbites audience, particularly on the Saturday after my birthday.
Congratulations. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you so much, Veronica.
Yeah, so I was so excited. I reached out. I didn't troll you, but I appreciated your work and went and found some of it. And I really liked what you were talking about. And I thought to myself, I have got to get Joel on the show because his insight, strategies, and techniques are exactly what our audience needs. So tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and kind of where you got here.
Sure. We could take hours talking about it, but sometimes our job is to collapse hours of material into a short space. So I hope to talk the talk as well as walk the walk. My public speaking journey began when I was in sixth grade, and I started doing competitive public speaking. We call that forensics. And that continued all the way through senior year in college. And I was a national champion in an event called After Dinner Speaking, which is a serious speech with a humorous speech with a serious point. Then I've been coaching for Seton Hall University of Pennsylvania. And then something sort of miraculous happened. I realized that everything I learned in competitive public speaking, I was applying when I interviewed for a job, when I spoke to a direct report or a manager, when I was sent to a conference, when I was at a brainstorming meeting. I was able to communicate more effectively. And I thought, there must be a way I can capture that in a bottle so I could share it with other people. So I began my public speaking training practice roughly 16 years ago. And about 8 years ago, I took a job with a major nonprofit as overseeing executive communications, which includes speech writing. So really my day job and my extracurricular life sort of came together as I was coaching public speakers. Mm-hmm. Now, one big turning point happened about 4 years into my public speaking practice, which was I was training people on all the classic things we know about public speaking. You could Google these, how to position yourself, how to gesture, how to use your voice, eye contact, things like that. But when I asked my clients and students what the point of their presentation was, they wouldn't have it. It wouldn't be a point. It would be a topic or a theme or a catchphrase or a category or a notion. Wouldn't be a point. So that's when I began to really transition my training into this fundamental and critical idea of what a point is. And that culminated in a book called Get to the Point, which I wrote in 2017. And then this year, I sort of recontextualized those ideas in the vein of leadership. How can leaders use their voice and what should they say? What should they be thinking to engage and inspire? And I picked those two words particularly. That's what leaders need to do, engage and inspire their teams.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's probably true on all levels. You've talked about some of the groups you've worked with. Do you feel like maybe senior level folks struggle with that? Or do you feel like that's a mid-level type struggle for a professional, or is it kind of all of the above? Because I feel like for some groups, you would think it would come naturally as part of their leadership skills. But I'm wondering if you're seeing that it's not necessarily that.
Well, public speaking ability, let's always understand that it is a skill and not a talent. So we are not born great public speakers. Some of us have childhoods that support us being more or less fearless. But I take all comers. I coach people who are petrified of public speaking. And then I work with CEOs who are experienced public speakers. And here's something I want your audience to know, Veronica. I see very experienced public speakers, senior executives who give very poor presentations. And I see interns who give very effective presentations. And what's the difference? It's if you know your point. And
Ah.
if you understand, your job is to convey that point. So I
Mhm.
never attach ability to experience or hierarchy. I only attach it to, if you can explain to me what your point is, and it truly is a point, then you're halfway there. Because
Yeah.
our job, to your audience, your job is never to be a great public speaker. That shouldn't be your goal unless you want more public speaking gigs.
Mhm.
Your job is merely to do one thing, and that is to effectively convey your point.
Yeah. And how does one get to that? There's probably a lot of us participate in strategic plans, and there's maybe
Mhm.
mission and visions and values and goals in an organization. But how does one really peel back the onion to find the point, to help them craft it the way you're suggesting?
Well, that's the question I wanted to answer with my book and my training, Veronica. I wanted an exercise. It's one thing to understand that a point is not a theme or a topic. For example, podcasting is a topic, but using podcasting to reach a critical millennial audience, that's a point. So, how do we get from one to the other? And I developed this thing I just wrote for CNBC about this. It's called the I Believe That test. And it's very simple. And if you don't
Mhm.
mind, I'm going to share
Yeah.
it now. It goes like this. You take what you think is your point, usually one sentence or a fragment. You put the words I believe that in front of it. And now, with only mild tweaking, if any, if you have a complete sentence, not a fragment, not a run on, if it would impress your fourth grade language arts teacher, it is a complete sentence, then you're on your way to making a point. Then we can sharpen it and learn how to champion it. But if it does not make a complete sentence, you need to reimagine it so that it is.
Mm.
So let's apply leadership. I believe that leadership, not a complete sentence, not a point. I believe that the importance of leadership, not a complete sentence, not a point. I believe that the evolution of leadership, I believe that the tools of leadership, none of these are points because you're not making your argument to me. What am I supposed to
Right.
take away from your communication? Which we know when we speak in conferences, that's the one big idea, what you want your audience to take away. But you can say, I believe that strong leadership requires active listening skills. Now, that's a complete sentence, and thus it is a point. It makes you say, go on. I want to
Yeah.
hear more about how listening skills are applicable to successful leadership. So
Mhm.
that's what the training is all about. But it starts with that element, and that's the big exercise. If people
Mhm.
take away anything from this conversation or from my work, please use that I believe that test. Now, you don't have to use the words I believe that. There's a benefit to using those words, but really it's just a tool to make sure you're conveying your point and not doing something far less, which would leave you pointless.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I love that. And it seems like a lot of folks maybe get close to it, but I have to say I've actually heard presentations that were billed as the next best thing that I'm going to learn as a leader, as a professional, and then I get there and I feel like I was let down a little bit. So I feel like you're on to that. And if more folks invest in just that exercise, they're probably going to be able to improve all aspects of the way they communicate. Maybe not just their speaking.
Right. And I like to provide tools. Often we see speeches begin with, let's talk about entrepreneurship. Let's talk about leadership. Let's talk about podcasting. I don't know. Maybe you have ideas. Maybe I have ideas. We'll get those ideas together. Hey, we're just talking about it. That is not point making. So I like to give what I call power words to make sure you're making a point. I suggest, I propose, I recommend.
Mm.
Write these down. If you say those things, I suggest, I propose, I recommend, you are forcing yourself to put yourself and your reputation out there to make a point, and it will drive the kind of dialogue that you need to ultimately have impact.
Yeah, and it also positions you as an expert, right?
Right.
And so I love that that those words are simple, but put together, they really can create a profound impression of who you are and your level of expertise.
Right. They definitely support your authority.
Mhm.
And they're also a professional development tool, by the way. I often say that if you're a leader of people and they bring you a status report, your job is to say to them, all right, thank you for the information. What do you recommend? And if you keep doing that, then sooner or later, that person who reports to you will come, they'll give you the status report, and then they'll end it with, and here's what I recommend.
Yeah.
And that's a leadership skill, whether you're technically a leader or not. All of us in the professional world should be looking to convey leadership skills and utilize leadership skills. And using those power words are one way to do it, regardless of your place in the hierarchy.
Yeah, absolutely. Words have power.
Mhm.
And so shifting gears just a little bit, how do you feel that the space changed, if any, during COVID, right? So many of us were participating in these global summits, big national meetings with folks all over the country. And then all of a sudden we created this digital space where we're engaging and trying to convey points and a flow of energy, but it was via a camera and a microphone. And how do you
Right.
feel like that changed, if any?
Yeah, when we moved from rooms to Zooms, many of us made assumptions that it would be the same. We have the same points, the same people. I'm just seeing them as a Brady Bunch instead of in person. Therefore, I could do everything the same. And that turns out not to be true. For one thing, there's this idea called Zoom fatigue, which sounds like
Yeah.
an ism. But if you Google it, you could see that there's been some limited research about it, about this idea. How do I reconcile my brain being at work, but my body and my environment being at home? That can be very stressful. Also, we're a lot closer. Nobody would have a meeting in an elevator. Why? Because we're too close together. Yet
Right.
our faces are that close, and that creates more of that Zoom fatigue. So how do we deal with it and cope with it? One of the ways that I counsel my clients and my students is to make sure that your head and shoulders dominate the screen. We don't want to be down here.
Right.
We don't want to have our heads cut off. We don't want to be way over here, because we're comfortable, like when we have a conversation with someone, to have that conversation come from mostly the head and the face. The other big thing is about the environment. So a lot of people have these very creative environments and artificial environments. I'm at a baseball game and I'm out in space. It's my favorite cartoon character, SpongeBob, is back there. And they think that this makes them entertaining. Of course, entertainment is not the goal. So here's
Right.
my rule on that. Anything in your environment, your virtual environment, that does not support your point steals from your point. So I always recommend neutral environments or some books in the background,
Sure, sure.
nice picture that either supports what you're saying. Hey, this person is smart, they read, or they're in a hospital setting, but not something that steals from that. Now, I see a lot of people who understand that, but they blur their background. And to that, because that's so easy. But here's something I say that you won't see as often. When we communicate, even on Zoom, it's a live environment. There is authenticity. We're human beings. We're talking spontaneously. It's supposed to be real and truthful. So why would you insert something artificial into
yeah.
that dynamic that's supposed to be authentic and
Mhm.
real? So even the blurry background, I don't recommend. Now, if you're just a participant at a meeting, I'll give you some room to
Sure, sure.
be there. But if you are presenting, make sure everything in your environment is supporting the point you're making through that presentation.
No, those are really great tips. And I know a lot of us struggled when we did go onto a virtual platform. We learned all the rules, the unmuting, the
Right.
hand gestures, hands in front of the cameras, all that kind of
Right.
stuff.
The lighting in front and not behind.
Right, right. It took a little bit of adjustment. And I'm wondering if you've noticed in your coaching business, if there's been any adjustments to the inverse, meaning now that many of us are coming back to the office,
Mhm.
sometimes we're still wearing masks, depending on where you are in the world. Have any of your clients struggled with how to get re-engaged physically being with people, especially when we're speaking?
I have not, and I have real world example of this. Just on Tuesday, I was in New Orleans speaking to clients who work in the banking industry. And I have to tell you, I haven't been in front of a live audience in about 2 years, and maybe it's been a while for them as well. It was like getting on a bicycle. It was so comfortable.
Hmm.
And not only did I appreciate it, but I think they appreciated it. It's a little like gravity. We just fell into it. There were rules about masking and things like that, but by and large, it was a more human environment. And the virtual environment, though it has a lot of benefits, including chat, polling, uh, but there's nothing like a live environment. I always say,
Right.
we are human beings. What do we respond to as human beings? Things happening live in front of us in real time, real emotions, authenticity, human reactions, not artificial or press release reactions.
Right.
So the more we move toward a real conversation like you would have with your BFF, the more impactful that communication will be.
Yeah, yeah. And just probably the physical energy. I think that's
Yeah,
probably, and as a speaker, we always talk about understanding your audience, read your audience. So when the jokes are falling flat and no one's smiling, you may want to change course, right? But if you don't have that, and maybe you're speaking in a webinar situation where they can see you, but you can't see them, I wonder how that shifts for people who are trying to do formal business presentations or
right.
really important content to deliver.
And you bring up a really important point, Veronica. Even if you can see everybody else, we can't make assumptions about what they're doing. If someone looks away, that doesn't mean they're bored. It might mean their spouse is bringing them a sandwich or a cat is throwing up.
Right,
You never
right.
really know. So what I say, and it sounds controversial, but you don't have to pay attention to the people on the Brady Bunch. Because you may be wrongly inferring or having inferences about what their visuals are conveying. The other important thing to recognize, and many of us know this, I'm looking at you now, Veronica, but I'm not really looking at you.
Right.
The rules of eye contact have totally changed. Here's me looking at you at my camera,
Right.
the small, cold, black dot at the top of the screen. But if I really want to do eye contact, I'm going to be looking right there. That's hard for us human beings to look at a non-human being and pretend there's a human being there. But when you're making your point, if we do this right, we're going to have more revenue in the fourth quarter. If we do this right, we're going to save more lives. That will have more impact with eye contact. And on Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Skype, whatever you're using, eye contact is here, not here with me looking at the other humans.
Right. No, that's a very great point. That's a very great point. When you're working with folks, what do you feel is the most common struggle? You've talked about working with people who are petrified of speaking in front of a group, and you've given us some examples. But what do you think is the most common theme or the most common aspect that you've been able to coach them on that any of us can probably make an improvement on right now today?
Right. I would say this came out of the book that I wrote, The Language of Leadership. For leaders in particular, I found a very common mistake right at the get-go. When they put together a presentation, and I never say write a speech, because by the way, I recommend nobody writes a word for word speech. Audiences don't want to be read to. You're creating tremendous peril for yourself. What you do want to do is create notes so you can, in real time and somewhat spontaneously, convey an idea. But here's the wrong question that leaders often ask. What can I say? What do I want to say? What do I want to express? What do I want to tell my teams or tell the world? And that is the wrong question, because in presentation, it is not about what you say. It is about what is received. You can say a lot of things in a room with no people in it, but once you introduce people to the room, if they don't take away your key message, then it doesn't matter what you say. The end game is the impact you have on people, what they will take away, what they will think anew or do as a result of that communication. So if the wrong question is, what do I want to say? The right question is, what does my audience want and need to know? Now, I use both of those words because what an audience wants to know is usually things they already know. They want to hear appreciation. They want to hear that good times are ahead. They want to hear that there's vision. These are things that they're expecting. But what an audience or a team needs to know, maybe things they don't know, they don't realize. Here's new information. Here's information coming from the executive team. Here's the result of a study I'm going to share with you first. So let's put those in two different buckets. But if a leader or anyone understands what their audience, whoever they are, want and need to know, if they can identify that, and they don't have to do that by themselves, use your executive team, use your HR team, use people you trust. Identify that. Work backwards so you understand how your communication will match what people want and need to know.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And let me ask you, specifically when we are working on a speech, you mentioned a speech, and I'm envisioning a CEO who has pulled the team together, maybe the cabinet, all the chiefs are in a huddle.
Speechwriters, right.
Yeah, you've got everybody giving you all this content. How does the person delivering the content get to that connected, authentic message when you've got so many people providing insight? Because I feel like oftentimes the CEO is guided by a very strong cabinet with facts and figures and data, but their leadership style may be one that is maybe funny. Maybe they use a lot of humor. So how does all that come together when you're putting together a really important speech for a really important group of people?
Yeah, that's a huge challenge because you're right. We know authenticity is critical because you do not get to trust, which we know is important,
Right.
without authenticity. And if you come off as inauthentic, you are actually sabotaging that trust because audiences, especially teams that are used to you, they can sniff out when you have a team of writers and you sound like a press release
Right.
or like a tagline. So how do you get to authenticity? One is skipping the script. Usually those people are
Yeah.
writing out like sound bites for you. They shouldn't be do that. A key message, as we say in PR, is not a script. It is an idea that you're being supported with. So do not bring a script to the table that will force you, in fact, to use your own natural language. Never say anything that you don't believe or use any words that you would not ordinarily use. Leaders need to get their red flags ready to look at something and say, this is not me. One of my earliest experiences in speech writing was writing something for my CEO that was so clever. I just patted myself on the back. I told my family and friends, get this, wouldn't this be awesome? And she wrote back, thank you for this, but I'm actually not that clever. And it doesn't sound like me. And I realized then, you learn a lot of lessons throughout time, and I benefit from this being my job. You realize then it's not your voice, it's their voice. But often, if you're supporting a senior leader, or even if you're a speechwriter, the big key is not writing what they might say. The big key is never writing what they would never say.
Right.
Let's start there.
Right.
So if you're going to do nothing else, remember that. So the leader is responsible for making sure it sounds like them.
Mm-hmm.
The supportive team is responsible for understanding this is not about me scripting you. This is about me supporting you.
Mm-hmm. No, that's brilliant. And how do you feel like that translates, if it does, to the online entrepreneurship space? Many of us are used to a corporate environment. We're used to boardrooms. We're used to stakeholders and all of that kind of stuff. But some of us have chosen since the pandemic to leave the office, stay at home, and design these online businesses. How does that translate into communicating with your audience?
Right. To tell you the truth, Veronica, some of the skills I talk about in a live meeting are the same in a real meeting. Like, don't put off volume. Still speak with volume because volume conveys authenticity and competence and confidence. Still use pausing, not just because it slows you down, because your audience needs twice as long to receive and digest what you say as you need to say it. These are things I spoke about before the pandemic. They're things I talk about during the pandemic. But I will say this, personal storytelling, we all know, is a powerful tool for presenters. It becomes even more powerful in an online environment. So we were talking a moment ago about authenticity. Nobody needs to be funny. Even if you are funny, a joke comes and goes. Maybe somebody tweets it. It's a moment of entertainment.
Sure.
But if you tell a personal human story, and I'm not talking about something cinematic, I'm talking about what your 6-year-old said to you that morning, what you heard on NPR, the funny thing that happened over the weekend. That makes you seem human. That makes you seem relatable. But the one thing I want your audience to leave with in terms of storytelling is that the most important part of the story is not the story. It's the part where you attach relevance to it. And that happens with these words. This story shows why we must. This case study is a great example of why we should. This moment illustrates what happens when we apply this campaign to this challenge. Once you say those are the magic words. Those are the words that elevate a story from just riveting to relevant.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, those are fantastic tips. And I think they apply across the board. So I'm really glad you mentioned that. Describe to us how your trainings work. You mentioned working with clients and groups. Do you do one-on-one trainings? How can people work with you? Because you've got some fantastic strategies and clearly some great experience. How does it work?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I sort of reinvented it based on my material and what I'm sharing, not based on a template that's out there. So I'm not the guy that's really going to work with you for a year, every other week or every week. That's not my style. What I do is first, I teach you what a point is, how to sharpen it, and how to champion it. And with clients, I work with their points. Sometimes it's a team of 12 people. I'm about to do something in Pennsylvania for about 50 people. Sometimes it's one person. And we talk about and we make sure that my client understands what their point is, because usually they have a sense of it, but they're not articulating it as a point. So we work on finding out what their point is, how to sharpen it, how to champion it. And the only other thing, frankly, that I do is I come back later and I say, if you have a presentation to give or a sales call, bring me in a couple days before then. And that's when I can see you making your point in the context of this particular client you have, or this particular opportunity you have. And then we can go over words, structure, your intro, your conclusion, your closing, your examples. That's when we can sort of fine tune and sharpen the edges of it. So first is about information, having you understand your point. Second is about tightening the screws, making sure you're giving the most powerful presentation that you can. And that's it. And then I'm brought in if ever there are other opportunities or things like that. But that's how I approach my training.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And it probably gives your clients just a boost of confidence.
Right.
If they're struggling, to just have someone give just a few little minor tweaks. Like you said, I love the phrase you use, tightening the screws, because oftentimes that's all you need and it changes the entire dynamic. So
right.
Sounds like a great investment.
Yeah. And it's so fundamental, really. I would do the same or similar presentation to a high school student that I would to a CEO of a major corporation. And those, business people, sometimes their points, they don't realize it, but they stop short. They say, if we do this right, and this is often the way a point is, if we do X, then Y will result. So if they say, if we do X, we'll get more traffic to our website. We'll be able to build more facilities. More people will write checks to us. And those aren't really the larger goals. If you work for Coca-Cola, your goal is not to have more Coca-Cola machines around. Your goal is to sell more Coca-Cola.
Right.
If you're a teacher, your goal is not to go through a curriculum. Your goal is to have your students leave better prepared for their future. And certainly if you're in a nonprofit, your goal isn't to bring more traffic to your website. Your goal isn't even to have people write checks. Your goal is to save lives. Save the world. And people want to hear that. Those, again, are magic words. What is the ultimate goal of your point? So that's what I train people to do, whether you're saving lives or selling more Coca-Cola. That's the work we do together.
Yeah, that's so exciting. I love that you shared that. And your website is there on the screen for those of you listening on the podcast, is joelschwartzberg.net, and it's in the show notes. Joel, is there anything you want to leave us with before we sign off?
Just know that without a true point, you are rendered pointless. So I wish everyone success in using the I Believe That test, using the resources at joelschwartzberg.net to help you know your point. I would also love if people, if they're on Twitter, they could follow me at the Joel Truth, because I like to be, as they say in IT, open code. I like to share these ideas for free. And so following me at the Joel Truth on Twitter is one way to get that information.
Awesome. Well, I will definitely be sure to be following you, because I did not check out your Twitter. That was the only social media handle I didn't get. So I will be adding that to my list for sure. Thank you. It was so great to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Veronica. It was a pleasure.
Oh man, wasn't that fantastic? I took lots of notes, and I will be adding to the show notes on the podcast so that everyone can also get some of the benefits that Joel had. We had some great guests checking in. Looks like Ginger there is going to be following Joel on Twitter as well. So thank you. And I will be bringing you another phenomenal guest next week, because here at Saturday Soundbites, we talk all things visibility strategy that are going to help you improve the way you communicate. So if you're listening on the podcast, make sure you hit subscribe. We don't want you to miss any episodes. And if you're watching on Facebook and catch the replay, #replay, so Joel and I can go back and say hello. With that, I will wrap up this episode, and I'm sending you lots of positive energy and light.